means. And
emotion is the base motivator for all human behavior. We do nothing without desire, and we do not desire without feeling.
Services? Nope.
To destroy through anger is merely to destroy. But to create through compassion, to immediately refuse participation, is to abolish.
each year losing.
Originally, this was supposed to take a different tone and a different direction, but this happened.
It's social media that let me connect to people like Ilana, Aqua, Princess, Audrey, and Hannah, all of whom are wonderful people who are a joy to talk to and who have inspired me greatly. Without social media, can I honestly say I would be where I am today, about to quit YouTube? No, wait.
And then this happened. And what I was writing became obsolete in the span of a few hours. The actions that these two women took in announcing that they were quitting made me reflect on what it was I was doing and how I want to enter this space. This was going to be a single, playful, and fun video, but since Yara Zaid and Lindsay Alice quit, I realized that I had to split this into two, because I have a lot to say, and I don't want my topics to be random. One of the things I learned from the parts I played in FD and Foreign Man's videos is that people relate to me through my vulnerability. And so, for however long I am here, I am going to bare my soul to you. And the days after Yara and Lindsay left, I saw a lot of creators expressing the same anxieties, feeling as if you don't belong to yourself, or being afraid of being misrepresented, upsetting people, being abused, held to account for something you've already apologized for, or feeling dehumanized. To me, it seems the only way to weather the storm of this platform of social media is not to care. And the truth is, I know enough about myself to know that that's never going to happen. I'm always going to care. What's more is that these dynamics we see playing out around creators online also play themselves out within in-person communities. This resonated with me because I've seen this dynamic play out in my own social circles. I have had some of these things happen to me on a micro scale, both on social media and off. The dynamics of tearing down public figures play themselves out among individuals, families, friends, organizations, everywhere. Everyone talks about how this is a social media phenomenon, but I think it's deeper than that. If this urge were not already within us, then it would not happen on social media. We rightfully think of these platforms as manipulative and dangerous, and we rightfully think of them as productive and positive. But that's only because we are these things. Yara, Lindsay, and many others have pointed this out. I am not saying anything new. It seems a foregone conclusion that the people close to us, and those that we have the greatest admiration for, are those that draw our greatest ire. However, I'm not here to scold anyone. I don't think that's helpful. Besides, this video, all of my videos, are going to be about me. So what I'm going to do is be vulnerable. What I'm going to do is try to model what I think is necessary. I'm going to, as a good fiction writer would, show you. But as a good academic, I'm also going to tell you. I don't think accusing others of having done this or having done that achieves the desired ends. Instead, I'm going to try to respect your agency. I'm going to show you myself, and I'm going to invite you in. I'm going to invite you to understand yourself through me. That seems to be what I am good at. I am not well known enough to feel as if I'm losing my sense of belonging to myself, as Yara did. I'm not well known enough for my past transgressions, my history of having abused others, to have surfaced and seen current me dragged to the stocks for something old me did and did her best to reconcile for. I'm not well known enough to become the vehicle through which people express their attachments to an idea, nor am I well known enough for people to feel betrayed by me en masse. The truth is, I delayed doing any of this for a while and found convenient excuses not to make anything, not to write, not to speak, not to exist beyond the confines of my small social circle. Because I'm terrified of you. Because power, when you know you have none against the many, when you care about what the many have to say, the power the many wields becomes paralyzing. I felt this before I made a single video. Among you are people who mean well. Among you are people who hide behind those who mean well. Among you are people who think punishment is accountability. Among you are people who criticize with the intent of helping. Among you are people who want to perform. Among you are people who, like me, have been deeply wounded by an unjust world. Among you are people who, like me, are tired of doing the same dance over and over and over again. You are terrifying. This video was going to be about my philosophy, and it still is. But I've realized that my philosophy has to include me. So it has to be about myself. How I want to run this channel is a direct reflection of how I'm working to live my life. I have been party to the mob, so to speak. I'm guilty. I have levied criticism amidst many that added nothing but derived some tiny sense of power for myself. Because in a world that seeks to disempower me constantly, any moment of power feels good. But I noticed something about myself over this past year. I realized that when I accepted my powerlessness, not in the sense that I gave up, but in the sense that I'm simply not capable of saving the world, I became kinder. I backslid through this maybe 6 or so months ago. It was at the end of a toxic relationship. I used to call it abusive on the other person's part, but I've softened on that. And I haven't reached out to them about it because I'm not sure they want to hear from me. But amidst this backslide, amidst this misery, I became angry. My despair tore at me, and I began to seek power again. I wanted my misery to go away. And because of that, I thought tearing down those that I saw as reflecting the structures and social problems that stand in the way of me being happy would help. I felt that the tiny bit of whatever I could do would hold someone accountable and result in me changing even the tiniest thing. It made me feel a tiny bit better. Rage protected me from pain. Rage is safe. Rage externalized my hurt because nothing can interrupt your rage without your consent. You can always get angrier. Happiness and joy are vulnerable and fragile. They can be broken and interrupted in an instant. One thing, one event, one word can ruin your day, your year, your life. But rage stops when you want it to. Rage gives you a sense of control. Rage gives you a sense of power. But these are fleeting, and once my moment passed, I came back to earth, and I realized that I was powerless. And so, I sought the next thing that would make me angry. Sometimes I did it to myself. and manifested rage from a past experience. Because if you're angry, you don't have to be hurt. But I didn't target the worst. I targeted those who I felt I could affect. I targeted trans women, especially white trans women. I targeted cis women, especially white cis women. No, I did not target Lindsay Ellis. But does it really matter? Does it make me any better if I didn't? I targeted a person with feelings, emotions, and a life. And I was one voice among who knows how many doing the very same thing. I contributed to abuse in one way or another, and in my past have been the originator of it. I have abused people, and I never want to do that again. The person you are listening to now is still capable of doing these things, not because I'm some monster, but because I'm a person. I'm no different than you. We are all flawed. None of us are good. None of us are bad. We just are. Even those of us who we call wholesome and good, or believe ourselves kind, have done something to deeply wound another person. And if you think you have it, you just don't know about it. Or it just hasn't happened yet. But I promise each and every one of us is or will be guilty. Perfection is unattainable. We are human. So, as it relates to this channel, first and foremost, everything I make on here will be in good faith, and anyone I criticize will be criticized in good faith, with kindness, empathy, and grace. This is going to open me up and make me vulnerable in a lot of ways that people fear. I will be hurt. I will, no matter what I do, become a site of performance if I get big enough. But I hope that in making myself vulnerable, that by doing things this way, letting myself be hurt, and refusing to give in to the rage, that my presence here, no matter how temporary, will help model some sort of change. Until I am incapable of doing it, I am going to give grace to everyone. This does not excuse, but I am going to refuse to render judgment. You cannot force anyone else to take accountability. You can punish them, but I do not think that that is accountability. Accountability, I think, comes from the self.
If you hurt someone's feelings, that's how you get accountable. You don't remove yourself from the situation. You fix yourself. Be better. Speaking from experience. Everyone's capable of mistreating the people they love in their life. Everyone's capable of accountability for that and doing the other thing instead as well.
Accountability, I think, comes from a change in behavior, a change in outlook, and an acknowledgement of what harm you have done. I think punishment disallows this. I think punishment is a barrier to accountability. People become defensive, indignant, and upset because they are not recognized as people who made a mistake or an active decision for any reason. This does not mean that the reason is acceptable or okay, but it is a reason, whether we like it or not. Explanations for and understanding behavior are not excusing it. We refuse people their agency when we tell them that we don't care about their reasoning. We make them small, and in response, they either submit or they become indignant and tell you to fuck off. Either way, nothing changes. People do not do things without cause. I've learned, through living in the roughest parts of America's cities, through getting locked up, through having guns pointed at me here in the US, through having mortars and rockets fired at me in a foreign country I had no business being in, through years and years of untreated mental illness and incessant ableism, through a lifetime of racism, homophobia, and now transphobia, through a lifetime of harmful demands for me to be someone I am not by a society that is fundamentally sick, through suffering that I have both lived and caused. The only times I found peace. The only times I could relax. The only times I could heal and grow were when I let go and accepted just how powerless I am and how productive that powerlessness can be. I am making a conscious decision to refuse. I am going to take people seriously and give grace, even if I am given none in return. I think it is time to depart from old, generally accepted ways of doing things. I think it is time for me to let go. I think I need to accept that I don't have much control over how people view me. As Khadijah says, once it's on the internet, it no longer belongs to you. And I think that includes myself. However, I think this applies off the internet as well. There are a million different versions of me in the minds of a million different people, and I have little control over that. Those versions of me exist, no matter what I do. I said in the channel trailer that I don't view ownership the same way I did prior to the pandemic. I think when it comes to my ideas or my beliefs, that they don't really belong to me. They are a product of more than just my ruminations. I think of it this way. If I present my ideas to another person privately, then what claim do I have to them? It is up to the person who hears my ideas to understand them and create them with me. Not actively, but in the sense that I have to interact with other people and other things to be certain that I exist beyond the confines of my own imagination. If I have an idea and never tell a soul to work or achieve it, then can I really ever claim it as mine? Who, besides me, will ever know that I had that thought? To me, it seems that everything requires interaction for it to become something, for it to do more than exist. In my mind, my ideas or thoughts can only truly become when they are seen or recognized as such by another. Think about our need to share what we are doing and our need to be seen doing it. If I need these other people to help me create by seeing or recognizing, and I think all of us need this to some degree or another, no matter what we say, no one lives their lives alone. If I need other beings to help me make whatever I am making, to make myself, then what can I really claim as mine or me? Without injecting a moral claim and just observing what happens in this situation, needing another person to help me create, I don't think it's possible for me to ever really say that something, even myself, is ever truly mine. There are a million different versions of me in the minds of a million different people, and I have little control over that. Those versions of me exist, no matter what I do. This concept of ownership, this idea of control, I think, at least in our minds today, has strong ties to capitalist ideas of ownership. It makes sense. We have to be able to claim something as ours in order to earn money off of it. If it isn't enclosed, then anyone can lay claim to it or use it for their purposes irrespective of what you want. If you can't claim it as yours, then you can't be paid for it. This is something that I think permeates all the way down to the individual. We internalize what we're taught by the world and are coerced to behave this way. We all have to eat. But I think all levels of politics are necessary, from the individual to the structures of society, our interactions with ourselves to interactions with others. However, I think this goes deeper than capitalism. Capitalism would not exist were the components necessary for its creation not already in place. No social order ever perishes before all the productive forces for which there is room in it have developed, and new, higher relations of production never appear before the material conditions of their existence have matured in the womb of the old society itself. These things were not created by a god, they were made by humans. I think capitalism persists because it exploits something within us, Otherwise, it would fall apart. We can be coerced through marketing to consume endlessly because marketing works. Homophobia, racism, and transphobia can be programmed into us because our brains and bodies respond to conditioning. Capitalism persists because the conditions for its existence persist within us. So I think that breaking the structures that oppress us and others starts first and foremost with our self-conceptions. Maybe it's time for me to give up ideas of ownership. Maybe it's time for me to view things, even myself, as something that exists because another something helped create me. I think our attachment to our ideas and the way we view ownership leads us to want to claim them and to refuse to allow them to change, to demand that they be recognized as correct. I say this a lot to my friends, and I'll likely say it here over and over again. Emotion is the base motivator for all human behavior. We do nothing without desire, and we do not desire without feeling. I've said this in my trailer, but I didn't explain what I meant by it. Everyone's wrong, you and I included, but I want to amend that a bit. Everyone's wrong, and everyone's right. I'm what folks call an affect geographer. For me, the most important thing to understand is experience, because experience makes evident what is happening to a person, a place, a thing, or a non-human animal. Nat O'Grady in Geographies of Affect explains it like this. Affect can be expressed spatially as existing across and among people and things, not within them. Affect assumes a level of openness on behalf of the body, with each body showing a capacity to affect and a capacity to be affected by that which they coexist with. The reciprocal conditions in which affects proliferate also feed into the sense of temporality that affects perform. Everything has time or temporality. It is a component of existence. Decay, death, half-life, entropy are all, for the most part, facts of existence. We all die, things change and deteriorate, and new things are born and created. This means that affect, or when something affects you, it imprints upon you and you upon it. It and you become something else the moment you affect each other. We are constantly being changed by and changing the things around us. And I think the major way we experience these things, these changes, is through our emotions. This way of viewing the world is a derivative of perspectivism. Perspectivism is from Nietzsche and is used by Deleuze, but can be related to what Donna Haraway calls situated knowledges. It means that your ability to know truth, whatever truth is impacted by who, where, and when you are. Your personal bias, ability to see, and ability to understand are shaped and informed by the world around you. Do you all remember the 6ix9ine cartoon, the one around in like 2015, then was edited like a year later? The one where one person is yelling 6 and the other is yelling 9, that then got edited to say, well, actually, one of these people is right. Internet arguments are... I'm trying to stop doing them, but perspectivism is kind of like the edit of the comic. The original comic is more like relativism. It makes truth into something that changes depending on relative position. The edit is closer to perspectivism, but a better way to illustrate it would be to then zoom out of the number entirely and say, well, really, both people can only see this as a single number because of where they're standing, but in reality, this is a decoy number on top of a giant land-born anglerfish, deriving value from getting them addicted to the angry, endless, unwinnable argument. The fish then goes on to buy up land on an island filled with indigenous people and kicks them off of it because it's pretty. The point is that perspective is limited, and because it is limited, it is wrong about the truth, but it is right about its own experience. For any one perspective to be true, then it would mean that I, a person with limited perspective, is capable of and does see everything. Answers to problems, especially social ones, are often so complicated that they might as well not exist. If we accept that Michel Foucault is right, and I do, at least on this, knowledge is shaped by and defined by power. Power's position and designation of what can and cannot be known in both the general and scientific sense establishes what Foucault refers to as the episteme. He is quoted in Power, Knowledge. I would define the episteme retrospectively as the strategic apparatus which permits of separating out from among all the statements which are possible those that will be acceptable within. I won't say a scientific theory, but a field of scientificity, in which it is possible to say are true or false. The episteme is the apparatus which makes possible the separation, not of the true from the false, but what may and may not be characterized as scientific. Think about what we see as valid knowledge, and who it is that gets to claim that validity. Academics like myself, the hard sciences like physics or chemistry, even if you are a humanities scholar or a social scientist, then your work is not as valuable as a chemist or an economist. This becomes even more stark when you examine how indigenous knowledge is treated as mythical and magical, or completely invalid because it isn't necessarily written down, despite being some of the most effective ways to address climate change. I think this issue of knowledge and power becomes even clearer when we look at how the African philosopher V.Y. Mudimbe examines colonization in his book The Invention of Africa. In it, he says,
"But it can be admitted that the colonists, those settling a region, as well as the colonialists, those exploiting a territory by dominating a local majority, have all tended to organize and transform non-European areas into fundamentally European constructs."
In other words, Europe did a colonialism. But what he goes on to say is that Africa itself, and I would apply this to all the continents, was first separated from Europe, then created to be exploited as a site of colonization, and that this shaped everything that happened on the continent. Africa and Asia aren't separate from Europe in any objective sense. They're all connected by land, irrespective of how small that connection may seem. They're even connected by water. They're all on the same planet. They're all made of dirt and rock. They're all populated with people, plants, and non-human animals. But all of this was deemed unimportant. All of this was ignored in order to racialize. What this means is that our current languages and our current ways of knowing are not only limited by our individual and personal perspectives, but that even those perspectives are limited by power and colonialism.
Regardless, race is a social construct that benefits Western imperialism, meaning race was constructed by the colonizers to benefit their bank account. What was meant to be a thing that just allowed colonizers to twist the Bible to say that they had a scripturally ordained right to capture, enslave, and plunder the land and people of Africa, the Americas, and Asia. Wow. The whole world, race has evolved into something much greater than even they expected. Therefore, how we view race, it heavily varies depending on social context. So let us let's get the pillows right and let's back up a little bit here. We do not have the power of language on our side on purpose.
What Julesy touches on, knowingly or not, is what V.Y. Mudimbe calls the colonial library.
They speak about neither Africa nor Africans, but rather justify the process of inventing and conquering a continent and naming its primitiveness or disorder, as well as the subsequent means of its exploitation and methods for its regeneration.
Our ways of knowing, the manner in which we examine and understand the world, are also the result of colonization, and for that, our uncritical use of this colonial library reproduces and further entrenches colonialism. English, French, and so on were imposed upon us, as well as the concepts expressed by the words in these languages. Think about all of the words that Black people, quote-unquote, make up, or all of the various words and pronouns people create to express their gender or sexuality. But I want to come back to the uncritical use of the colonial library I mentioned earlier, because Mudimbe himself does not advocate ignoring these knowledge systems, but instead gleaning from them what is useful and adding to them what is useful from other epistemologies. Returning to Foucault, one of his key concepts is suggestification. He gives a good example in History of Sexuality. Gay or homosexual is a behavior that has existed for as long as people have peopled. But the concept of gay, as we know it today, didn't exist until around the 19th century, when power decided that homosexuality was a bad thing. Homosexuality was created to label, control, and other a population of people that did not recognize themselves as gay before being labeled as such. The key thing, I think, to take away from his concept of subjectification is how we, as the subject, are first created from above, and through our participation, we are then recreated from below. This can be, and he says this many times, a site of power, even if the original creation was a means of subjugation. On this, he and Mudimbe seem to agree. The current ways of knowing ourselves and the world are fundamentally flawed, but when used critically, can become sites of liberation. I think that because of the limits placed upon our ability to know anything, ourselves included, that our current accepted ways of knowing are completely insufficient. Because they are restrictive, they can only paint a small and incomplete picture of the world. Because of their perspective and the goals baked into them, they function to reproduce the ills of society, no matter how much we try to change them. Dr. Ziauddin Sardar has been writing about post-normality for well over a decade now. In a seminar posted by the Institute for Humanities in Africa, which you should go watch the entirety of, he explains how we are post-truth, and how it is not just that people lie, but that non-truth is integrated into society.
And even now, in recent news, Britain is being described as a very corrupt country. There's lots of lies and fabrication going on. So it's not just that Oxford Dictionary chose a word, post-truth, but we could actually see the manifestation of that word in political life. So here is very famous.
It's somebody's version of the truth, not the truth. Don't do this to me.
So truth isn't truth, but now suddenly we are in an age where truth does not really matter. Host of books on post-truth and how it has shaped society. All of them actually basically point out that lies have been instituted in society. Lies have been instituted in political life, in social interaction, in cultural phenomena. That lies have become deeply embedded in society.
These contradictions we are seeing play out renders things unknowable, because the way we knew them before was through a colonial construction of the world. This is not only true for gender and race, but I think it's true for everything. Colonialism has permeated our cultures, our institutions, and our individual lives, where we spend a lifetime unlearning the harmful things, only to accept that some things are exempt, when I think they are not. Dr. Reginald Odwar, a philosopher at the University of Nairobi, in another talk, which you should also go watch the entirety of, Dr. Reginald Odwar answers a question posed about the trap of reifying the colonial library and Western concepts of ownership of theories or ideas, and the necessity of engaging critically with existing knowledge systems.
Thank you very much. On the first question of the colonial library, are we forever tied to it? Because we tend to always be bashing it, answering it, resisting it. I would say that the colonial library is so powerful that because we are always having younger scholars and because there is so much literature that subscribes to that library, it will be necessary to keep answering it. Otherwise, some people may end up floating into its deep end without even knowing. But we must start being more busy exploring our own ideas, yes. And on whether theories belong to regions, I agree with you that the West loves to own, especially capitalism. That's why they have individual property rights. But we should ourselves think in terms of, is an idea useful? And if it's useful, let's use it. I have never had anybody refusing to take a flight because aeroplanes were invented in America rather than in Timbuktu. So in the same way, let's use anything that's useful. It's part of the human heritage. Thank you.
I want to take this further and explain more of what I meant by critical use of the current ways of knowing. In Decarcerating Disability, Liat Ben Mosh explores abolition of the carceral, which is not just about prison abolition, but the abolition of carceral logics. In one chapter, she examines this idea of carceral enclosures, which she says refers not only to physical spaces of containment, but to particular logics and discourses that penal, prison, carceral abolition opposes. What she is getting at is that incarceration is not merely the urge to throw people in prison, but it is an entire logic of society that, I think, permeates down to the individual. In the same chapter, she explores abolition as a way of knowing, and illustrates how Maroon abolitionists created their own knowledge systems during slavery in the United States. Through this fugitive knowledge, these activists therefore rejected the call for gradual emancipation, and called instead for an immediate end to slavery, not just on moral or ethical grounds, but based on their desire to stay alive, as do present-day imprisoned intellectuals and Maroon abolitionists. I think we are struggling to understand the world because the ways we are given to know are not designed to understand the world as it is, or as it can be, but are designed to infuse falsehoods into our lives and force our behavior. I think that's why we're all so confused, why fascism is on the rise, and why people are actively resisting dealing with a global pandemic. Nothing makes sense, because it was never meant to. Nothing makes sense, because the structures of the world, and thus ourselves, are artificial manifestations of the human mind's desire to make things simple. I think the answer is to accept that we don't have the tools necessary to find the answers we're seeking, and to use the tools we have critically until we can create our own. Liat Ben Mosh examines abolition as a way of knowing. Again, in Decarcerating Disability, she says, abolitionist knowledge reconceptualizes notions like crime or innocence, what gets to be defined as crime, and who gets defined as criminal, disability or madness, as an identity in politics, not only as a medical diagnosis, and rehabilitation, which is seen as a form of assimilation and normalization, not just as benign treatment. Ideas of punishment, transformative justice versus revenge or retribution, notions of freedom and equality, whether we can feel free and safe without locking others away, and, on the other hand, concepts of danger and protection. Whom do we protect by segregating people behind bars, in psychiatric hospitals, and prisons? Is it for their own good? I want to apply this to everything. Abolition, I think, is the means through which we can critically engage these oppressive ways of knowing, to recognize the necessity of immediacy, to move beyond our current episteme, beyond the colonial library, and the shaky and unknowable nature of truth. But what comes next? If we abolish it, what do we have? I want to use this as creation through myself, because through me, through my perspective, is how I understand the world. Instead of trying to feign objectivity, I want to embrace the contradiction inherent in trying to seek truth as a subjective being. I want to embrace the contradiction of creation through destruction. Instead of trying to understand the world despite my experience, I want to use my experience to create the world I want. This is why I say I will refuse to judge. I am going to choose not to behave the way these things want me to. I am going to refuse to participate and live the necessity of abolition by engaging my emotions on purpose and choosing which I am going to express. Instead of anger as a way of knowing, as one of the most typical and expected responses, I am choosing compassion. It is through my desire to survive, through the immediate need for change, that I choose grace and compassion. To destroy through anger is merely to destroy. But to create through compassion, to immediately refuse participation, is to abolish and to choose to play by your own rules.
I think all of us has a very personal relationship to how we're racialized, but I don't know, individual exploration is always a good place to start. I don't love throwing out the baby with the bathwater when we talk about moving away from race ideology. I also gotta ask myself, who benefits from this racial division and subsequent tension? How do we teach about racism without reifying race, and how victims of those can end up perpetuating those same stereotypes they're trying to fight against because of race ideology? I'm thinking about how interesting it is that people with lots of intersecting identities seem to be better about leading these kinds of conversations. That's not a fact or true across the board, but it's just something I'm noticing, the type of language that I use in those videos. The biggest thing that I've come out of this series with is kind of a feeling of peace. Like I can exhale in a way, because before I was talking about theory of racelessness as an all or nothing thing where if I embraced it, it meant that I couldn't acknowledge anything about being racialized as black or identify myself as black or talk about colorism on TV, but it's none of that.
I don't call myself biracial, Asian, Blasian, mixed, or really even claim what others would see as a biological inheritance of whiteness. Blackness functions differently than other racializations. I think because of our specific type of displacement, because of the brutality of chattel slavery and the treatment of Africa by the entire world, anti-blackness is global. Whiteness, however, is about a lack of race. Black is a stand-in because of the erasure of difference and origin. But whiteness is not. It is purely erasure. It is fundamentally empty. Which is why I think it's constantly taking things from those it racializes, and why many of us will abandon our racialization for proximity to it, because being racialized means to be a site of oppression. I am not empty. I do not seek to flee my oppression, but to liberate myself from it. There is no lack of culture within me. I have a specific connection to a specific place in Asia. I know my family is from Japan, even if the racism of the United States nuked my Japanese family out of existence. Even if it made my father's life so difficult that he refused to learn Japanese from my grandmother, and she forgot her own language as a result. I did not grow up with all of my culture. I have to rediscover it. It was robbed from me. I am not Asian, and I will not call myself Asian. For one, I'm not treated like I'm from Asia. 2, Asia includes India, Russia, Laos, Vietnam, Japan, North Korea, and so on. What do all of these people have in common aside from being alive? And last, Asian is not a site of creation, a site of abolition for me. Black is. Japanese is. Because I can say exactly what imperialism and colonization have done to these specific identities within me, and use them to fight back. For me, to call myself Blasian or mixed would be to flatten the two things I am specifically identifying within myself as a means of taking control of my life and my experience. I'm not a pie chart. My race, nationality, and ethnicity are black, because that is how I am treated and that is the culture I was raised in. I claim Japanese as a stand-in for ethnicity, despite being a nationality, because I am making it a point to claim a culture that the United States violently stripped from my family in the white American suburbs, Hiroshima to Nagasaki. Kore watta building no chigasitsu no yoru datta. 原子爆弾の負傷者たちはろうそく一本ない暗い地下室をうずめていっぱいだった。生臭い血の匂い。 シュッシュ。汗臭い、一切れ、うめき声。その中から不思議な声が聞こえてきた。赤ん坊が参るというのだ。この時刻の底の夜の地下室で今、若い女が産気づいているのだ。街一本ない軽がりでどうしたらいいのだろう。人々は自分の痛みを患って気づかったと。私がサンバです。私が産ませましょう。と言ったのは、さっきまで埋めていた辞書書だ。かくて、からがりの地獄の底で、新しい生命は生まれた。かくて、暁を待たずチンバは、血まみれのまま死んだ。生ましめんかな。生ましめんかな。おのが命つとも